Hi, folks. I'm Father Joe Grimaldi. You can call me Joe, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast. But now, here's our host and friend, Ken Calvert.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ken Calvert alongside my very good friend, the always funny, the always amusing Father Joe Grimaldi. The Father Joe podcast proudly supported by our great friends at Hoot McInerney Star Lincoln 12 Mile Road and Telegraph in Southfield. Today I want to talk to you about the Lincoln Driver Assist technology. It's called the Lincoln Copilot 360, and it's so unique, so comprehensive that Lincoln has trademarked it. That's right. It's a collection of the most popular driver assist technologies designed, available anywhere. They help you keep at ease and driving safely. Now it includes blind spot detection. Driving forward assistance, allow me to explain that a little bit. If you get too close to a car, you're going to get a beep, 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 beep. Lane on-course alert detection, which I love. For example, if you start to stray from your lane, you get that rumble strip feel you sometimes feel when you're in a construction zone. Rear view backing up, monitoring and assist, you love that. Parallel parking assist. Explore the 2019-2020 vehicles that offer Lincoln Copilot 360 by stopping by Hoot McInerney Star Lincoln 12 Mile Road and Telegraph in Southfield, home of the Star treatment. All right, now, how are you, by the way?
I'm doing well, thank you.
I understand that you went up north, did a little visiting up north.
A little bit of Traverse City and Interlaken.
Interlaken, yeah. No, I've never been to Interlaken.
It's really nice.
They tell me it's beautiful. Now, I've been up to the Traverse City area, Harbor Springs. I've basically traversed most of the state. I haven't spent a lot of time in the Thumb, and my apologies to those of you in Alpena and the other areas up there. But nonetheless, it's always fun to go up north. You know one of the great radio questions, by the way?
No, ask me.
How do you define? Everybody that lives in Michigan says, I went up north for the weekend. When do you feel like you're up north in Michigan?
I think for me,
I'm dying to hear this.
I'm not one of the old-time residents, but I am here for many years.
Yeah.
Once you go beyond Saginaw, I feel I'm going up north. So that whole area to me is up north.
I feel like the Zilwaukee Bridge.
Okay, I agree with that.
Once I go over the Zilwaukee Bridge, a lot of people feel like it's when you get to that part of I-75 when both sides are heavily tree-lined.
Correct.
And you can see off in the distance, you have a couple of hilly areas in there. That's when I kind of feel like, I'm getting up north. I'm heading up north. A lot of people have a different interpretation of what up north is.
Well, up north is certainly peculiar to Michiganders. Okay,
it is.
People would never say that if they're visiting from other. Oh, we just went north. They don't say up north.
Right.
But for us, that means something.
Yeah, a lot of people will say cottage, lake house, cabin.
Yeah.
They have all different expressions that they use for the place that they have. I went up north. I went to Torch Lake, and I want to tell you something. I didn't stay with friends who had a cottage, a lake house, or a cabin. They had a home.
Yes.
It was nice. But you had a nice trip, yeah?
Very, very nice.
All right, good. You like the Traverse City area. It's become a very big city.
Very much so. In a way, it was quite a surprise because I have seen it about 50 years ago, and I really don't get to go up north a lot. And so I missed Traverse City. Yeah. And this time, I really got to spend time. It's just like a city with tall buildings, many restaurants. I don't know how many restaurants they have. New ones, old ones, in-between ones.
Yeah.
Some that have traditions, some that don't. But anyway, it's a very nice place.
I always get the biggest kick out of this. People that live up north, or don't live up north, but live rather down, I think they say downstate.
Okay.
If you're up north and you live up north, you say, I'm heading downstate. Real quickly, I'll just say that the winters, they're way too much for me. But people will always say, oh, but they've got the equipment up there to move the snow, so it's never a big deal.
Oh, it's always a big deal.
It's always a big deal when you look out the door and see 3
feet, especially if you can't open the door.
Did you stop Did you go to any Catholic churches that stood out?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
All right. Was there one in particular that stood out for you?
Well, the one that everybody seems to know well is St. Francis.
Okay.
We went to the neighboring one, which was very, very interesting. It just reminds me of this since it's more or less a Catholic podcast.
Sure.
It's interesting how for many years, we would send missionaries to Africa and to Asia and so on and so forth. Well, now the missionaries are coming here. So the pastor is a priest from Nigeria, and he's the pastor of the church that we went to.
Get out.
Really a very nice fellow.
Huh.
And of course, I happen to know the bishop of that area, Bishop Reicha. We were in Rome at the same time, so we spoke a little bit about that. I don't want to hold up...
No, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Did you have a chance to meet with him at all while you were
Oh,
up
no,
there?
because
Yeah.
the bishop resides in Gaylord.
Oh, okay.
But he's bishop of that whole area. So
Well, the reason why I ask, so the church up there has been established for probably at least 60, 70 years, yeah? St.
probably,
Francis?
yeah, it depends.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. And the architecture, was it old or new?
The one we were at was very new.
Okay.
And very nice.
That allows me to do this segue. What do you, Father Joe Grimaldi, miss about the old days in the Catholic Church?
There were many things that I liked in the old church. I hate to use that terminology, but primarily the reverence, which had nothing to do with the physical buildings, and the architecture was much more pronounced, generally speaking, so that, for example, if you were to go to the downtown area of Detroit, you will see some magnificent examples of the architecture that the people from Europe really carried out. And I'm talking about the people from Poland in particular. There's a number of churches that have their stamp on their churches, and they're just spectacular, the details.
Historic St. Anne comes to mind.
Yeah, it is. But St. Anne's is, the architecture there is very, very nice. Not as detailed and as intricate as places like St. Josephat or
yeah.
Sweetest Heart of Mary.
Yep. I guess I'm leaning on St. Anne's because of the fact that it's so old. I mean, it's
old. It's the oldest
historic,
one. Yeah. It's a historic church, and of course, she's the patroness of the whole Michigan area because there's a St. Anne's in Mackinac. There's, because she is the patroness of the Michigan area and the Detroit area in particular. And that's a very interesting place. And the pastor there now is starting to do a lot of work and bring it back up to par, if you want. Monsignor Kosanke is there now. He was in St. Regis for a while. But he's doing a lot of work and trying to recruit help and money to bring things up to snuff.
It's an ongoing process, isn't it, to try and find the funds to do what you want to do and hopefully can do.
Correct.
It's always a difficult mission. What else, you're talking about the architecture, what else do you miss about the old church?
Yeah, I'm going to say this too, to add to that. It's not just the architecture that makes the church. It's the people, basically. So the architecture can be the gym in the back of the school, okay, for the church. And it could be a cathedral, the cathedral of any one of them, the Basilica of St. Peter. These are grandiose, awesome type buildings, and they have their own way of inspiring people once they enter into the church. I like the idea of being inspired when you go into a church. If you walk into a place that's clinically, antiseptic, I call it that, it leaves you cold, you know what I mean? But yet, these other churches that we're speaking about, there's a certain inspiration that you get from the architecture, I think, from the atmosphere that's created.
Why do you think the new churches are so stoic, if you will, and antiseptic, to use your expression?
Well, they don't have to be antiseptic, but they are much more simple than they used to be in the past. Finances is the biggest thing, okay? There's a lot of people that feel, I'm not going to be contributing to some grandiose thing. I think we need a church. We're going to get a good church. We're going to get what's practically needed, and we'll leave it at that. I don't think the era of cathedrals is going to continue anymore, okay?
Right.
I think that's something of the past. Just like, we mentioned Sweetest Heart of Mary and St. Josephat. Both of those churches have become destination churches, if you want.
Perfect.
There's a lot of weddings that take place there. Actually, unfortunately, the weddings are what keeps those churches going because the congregation isn't there anymore unless they have, what do they call those, the mass...
mass mobs.
Mass mobs.
Or mob masses.
The mob masses that it does bring in the people so they could see this and appreciate what is there. But I think part of the simplicity of the architecture, part of it has to do with funds, money.
I think you're right about that, yeah. Well, I think for some reason in the 70s, or maybe the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, there was a trend to make them a bit more modern.
There's no question. I like to walk around Birmingham, and it's interesting to see the architecture of the houses. Mm-hmm. You have some that are very old but very beautiful. And then you have those that look like concrete blocks.
Yep.
And I'm sure they were expensive in their own right.
Yep.
But they're cold. They're like office buildings, okay, rather than a warm, welcoming home. And I think that might be true of the churches. You just mentioned the architecture shifted around the 70s when people's designs were different than they were in the past.
I think also a lot of people were starting to move away from putting all the expenses into these beautiful wood-featured pews. Just the pews alone, waiting for the pews to be built or shipped over here. That was something that could be done now on a lathe or some sort of a device that would make it quicker and more efficient and a little more comfortable. Don't you think that we all sort of moved a little bit into the comfort zone when we started to rebuild our churches?
When you look at the width of the seats of the old churches, normal people can't sit in them. They're just too small. Yes, things have changed that way. They're picturesque, they're beautiful, they're sentimental and so on, but they're not practical.
The kneelers, by the way, didn't have padding.
No.
The kneelers were a board.
And many churches don't even have kneelers anymore. That's another thing,
That's
too.
right, yeah. I'm surprised at that, though, aren't you?
Yes and no. If you go to Rome, many of the big churches don't have kneelers. They move the chairs around whenever they can.
What about people that feel a need to kneel?
Yeah, well... I noticed that in some places they do provide little pillows that you can kneel on. I don't know if a lot of attention is being given to that.
I used to call it the sneal when people sit on the edge of this
I see what you mean,
and then sort of kneel.
Yes.
I would call that the sneal.
It's almost, but it's not quite.
I would say, look, Grandpa's snealing. You know what I mean? And they're like, shh, shh. What else? Anything else comes to mind immediately? We're talking about the old church versus the new church in terms of design and the various elements of what we went through as kids and our younger days as Catholics and now here in nearly 2020. What about the actual Mass itself? Is there anything you miss?
Well, I'm going to say this much, that if you go back to 1960, you had many liturgical reforms which brought about the simplicity of the church. And so that many of the customs that occurred beforehand, for example, a simple thing like the maniple, where the priest used to wear this almost over the wrist, which was originally, let's say, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th century. A maniple would be a piece of cloth, but decorated and decorative, where they used to wash their hands, and that's where they would dry them. Well, now, of course, we have a piece of cloth that we give to the priest after he does the washing of the hands. And that whole thing goes back to the old days when the offertory meant that people brought goats and they brought eggs and they brought meats and so on, offering them to the church, part of the offertory, the Mass. Well, obviously, then the priest would receive these things and he would have to literally wash his hands to continue the Mass. And so that was developed into the maniple. Well, the simplicity of things certainly became more emphasized after 60 and 62, 61, 62, and those years.
That's also when the priests started turning around.
Oh, definitely.
They went from facing the altar to facing the congregation.
And even the vestments were very ornate.
Right.
Extremely ornate.
I like that, by the way, personally.
Oh, well, there's nothing... I like them both, actually, to be honest with you. I don't dislike... There are churches that are modern, that are done in good taste, and they can be welcoming, and they can be, how should I put it, beautiful as well. If the architect spends the time to really study what the liturgy is about and what things mean, then he'll reflect that in the type of architecture he will present to the committee. Always there's a committee that decides on what they're going to do.
There's a committee to put in a light bulb, believe me.
But...
we love our committees.
Well, building a church, you've got a serious
I know,
one.
and I'm glad that they do have committees for that.
Otherwise, you might go someone who's really wild and someone who's too conservative. You know what I mean? There has to be a balance.
Boy, that's so subjective when you think about it.
It is subjective, but I look at a house like we're in right now. There's a certain warmth, a certain charm that is hard to duplicate in the real avant-garde type of architecture.
I agree with you totally.
Yeah.
All right, I'll ask you this. What don't you miss? Well, wait, let me jump back one. Do you miss the Latin Mass?
Yes and no. I mean, there's a beauty to the Gregorian chant. When we speak about the Latin Mass, we're speaking about all aspects of it. So it's not that everything is done in Latin. That's not the only thing. You have the beauty of the Gregorian chant. There is something haunting, something reverent, something inspiring about listening to the Gregorian chant. Musically, it's usually a cappella. You don't need musical instruments in the background. These are the voices of the people that come across with the Gregorian chant. The Latin is beautiful too. The problem I see, though, is that most people do not have enough Latin to understand what is being said. So what good is being there, appreciating the beauty of what's presented, but by the same token not understanding what is going on?
I always thought that's what the Missal was for, the translation, if you will.
Yeah, but in the old days, the Missal was in Latin, too.
Wow, well, then that predates me, because my Missal, as a kid,
things started to change, because there was a slow change. First, you could get the other thing, too, the way the readings are presented and so on. Yeah, that could be okay, but it's the not understanding what the Latin has to say is the downside of the Latin Mass. So it's beautiful. There's no question. I have no doubt that it is a beautiful piece of music, or pieces of music that you hear. There's something mystery. There's something beautiful about mystery, huh? And that's why the priest had his back to the people, because again, it brings across the mystery of what is taking place.
I think my father and my mother and my uncles and my aunts all had a little difficulty with the priest all of a sudden facing the congregation. They were kind of like, I'm not used to this. You know what I mean? I'm so used to looking at the priest's back.
Oh, they did. There's no question. And there's some today that still hunger for the Latin Mass. They hunger for the way things were done in the past. But you know what? It's very difficult to put the toothpaste back into the tube.
I love that
after
expression.
It's out. I mean, it just doesn't. It's hard to do. Let me put it this way. And then again, the percentage of people that are willing to go downtown for the Latin Mass is very small compared to the people that don't.
Let me just tell you two things that stand out to me, and it seems to be typical of every facet of life right now. People don't dress the way they did when I was younger through my 20s and 30s. You at least put on a sport coat, but earlier than that, it was a suit and tie affair, a sport coat and tie affair. You dressed properly to go to church. I miss seeing people dressed the way I think they should dress when they go to church.
I'm in agreement. I hate to sound like an old fogey.
No, you don't.
But for me to see someone giving out communion, wearing shorts and
flip-flops
at the altar, to me, I don't find that as a reverent thing to do. Now, that you might as well blame the organizers of the liturgical ministers, which we have today, we didn't have in the past, because only the priest would give out the communion and so on and so forth. But if people stood up more for that type of thing, maybe it wouldn't be so prevalent in many of the churches on a Sunday. In other words, I think the pastor has to say something on occasion.
I agree.
And say we have to dress for Mass.
Yeah.
We're not asking you to put on tuxedos, but at least dress for Mass.
Uh-huh.
That's all part of the reverence. I mean, this is God that we're coming to worship. We don't come in because it's the guy from the saloon down the street, who's going to sing a little hymn.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that we have reverence when we do enter the church. So there was something to be said about that. The other thing I want to say is that if you look at many of the Protestant churches, I think they still hold fast. When they go into their house of worship, they are dressed.
Yes.
And it's something good to see. I mean, they're recognizing that they're there for the Creator.
As opposed to the Mass being an aside to the rest of that day's agenda. I'm going to be playing golf in another hour, so I got to wear the shorts.
Exactly.
I got to wear this shirt. I'm going to be getting into golf shoes, so I may as well just wear these sandals. Jesus wore sandals. Why not me? Hey, I see what you did there. Yeah. Anyway, long story short, those are just some of the items. So I think we could probably do another podcast on this at some point. Finally, I get one final, and then you get one final.
Yeah.
I miss the bells.
The bells?
The bells. The bells, the ring of the bells.
I can tell you why the bells are no longer in existence.
Okay.
In some churches. They still are.
I know. That's just what I was...
So, I miss those two. And I'll tell you why. It adds reverence. It shows you that this is something very important. But the other thing that it does that some people don't like, some of the liturgists don't like, is the idea that now we're isolating this part of the Mass and forget about everything else. We don't have to worry about listening to the readings. We don't have to listen to all the other stuff that goes on. But now, this is it. As long as we concentrate on the Eucharist and the raising up of the host, the raising up of the precious blood, and that's what the bells tell us to do. So, there are two ways of looking at it, but I do like them all the same. There's something that it creates a certain reverence, a certain silence, and so on. And there are churches that do a good job of that.
Yeah.
I was helping out at one of the churches where they use the bells consistently and beautifully. It's not just the one little tingle, okay?
Right, yeah.
It's a real nice...
Oh, no, we had a 3-set. Small, medium, and large.
Yes.
And we used to flip a coin as altar boys.
Yes.
Who got bells, okay? Somebody got bells, somebody got cruets.
Yeah.
And cruets wasn't too bad either if you were an altar boy. You know what I mean? You were right up there. You were part of the show. My dad used to say, I think those bells are to wake your uncle up.
Could be.
You know what I mean?
On Holy Thursday, on Holy Thursday when they kind of sing the Gloria and, the lights go up for a little bit, because we're finishing up with Lent and so on, the people are asked to bring bells besides so that the whole congregation has bells. And so that during the Gloria, they ring throughout the Gloria again to show that Easter is near, if you want.
It's nice. I like that.
We're finished with the Lenten season. We're beginning the Triduum, and so on and so forth.
All right. Well, listen, I think we did a nice job here.
I think you did.
And one of these days, folks.
I know, one of these days.
I'm going to reach right over there, right over this desk. Right over this desk.
Gleason.
I know that you can all imagine what it looks like in this studio right now.
Gleason would say that, didn't he? One of these days.
To the moon, Grimaldi! To the moon! Right. Hey, listen, we'll take you to the moon, Grimaldi! Next time we see you on the Father Joe Grimaldi podcast.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you. This is Father Joe Grimaldi, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Father Joe podcast.
If you'd like, you can email us. It's frjoepodcast@gmail.com. That's frjoepodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook. Simply search Father Joe Grimaldi. And thanks for listening, everyone.